This will be our second video in Unit 9. Unit 9, we're talking about physical ergonomics, which, as I established in the first video, is a very important topic for the safety profession. It's the number one type of injury. Work-related musculoskeletal disorders is the number one type of injury, and that's what we're really talking about with physical ergonomics. In that first video, I introduced physical ergonomics. In this video, we're going to talk specifically about ergonomic risk factors. When we talk about ergonomic risk factors, we're talking about those primary risk factors that contribute to the development of musculoskeletal disorders. And as we talk about these disorders, or as we talk about these factors, so we talk about these factors, keep in mind that it's usually not going to be just one of these factors that contributes to the development of the disorders. It's oftentimes a combination of these factors, and I'll mention that multiple times throughout the video, that it's a combination. It's not just one usually that leads to the work-related musculoskeletal disorder. First thing I'm going to do is just list the primary ergonomic risk factors, and then we will talk about each of the risk factors in a little more detail. First, ergonomic risk factor is awkward posture. The body being placed in an unhealthy, unnatural position. For example, the office worker that slouched over a desk, the assembly line worker that slouched over their assembly table. And we'll talk more about this when I later on. Let me just go ahead and move on. Let me just run through the list and then we'll go in more detail. I've got to watch myself. I'll start rambling on about each of these when I'm just trying to outline the primary risk factors. Another dimension of posture that can lead to musculoskeletal disorders is static posture. Static posture is when the worker is locked into the same position for lengthy periods of time, without movement, without stretching. Some primary examples of these would include a truck driver. 10, 11 hours a day, their hands on the wheel. They're not moving. They're locked into that position. And truck drivers have serious problems with back disorders, and a lot of that is due to the static posture. Same thing for equipment operators, bulldozer operators, motor grader operators. Crane operators not so much, because crane operators tend to have time between lifts to stretch and move around. But the dozer operator, they may be on that dozer all day in that same position, locked in. Forces. Heavy loading on the musculoskeletal system. That's what we're talking about when we talk about forces. And there are many examples. Lifting forces that are too great for the worker to safely be exposed to. With forces, a lot of times what we're talking about are lifting related tasks, or lifting, pushing, pulling, an overexertion of some sort. Really what we're talking about with forces is overexertion. Compression. Compression occurs when a body part is pressed against another object. Typically, that's what we're talking about. A body part is pressed against another object. This affects the nerves in the region that is compressed, and the blood vessels are affected, which affects the blood circulation. An example of this would be the assembly line worker with their forearms against the edge of an unpadded assembly bench or an unpadded workbench. This could also apply to office workers that have forearms that are compressed against the edge of a desk. And I should say something. This doesn't sound like a big deal perhaps to you, but 8 hours a day of this type of contact can lead to work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Repetition. The same movements over and over and over again throughout the workday. Assembling the same small electronic component for 8 hours. Entering data with a keyboard for 8 hours. Again, the same continual movement. It's not quite the same as static posture. There is some movement involved, but it's that same repetitive movement. That can lead to work-related musculoskeletal disorders. And finally, we have vibration. Vibration is a high-frequency movement of a tool or a piece of equipment. Normally, that's what we're talking about with vibration. Vibration can be of the single-point variety, or it can be whole body vibration. And we'll talk about both single-point and whole body vibration. A single-point vibration has a different effect on the human body than whole body vibration. In some ways, the whole body vibration may be more serious, but both can result in relatively serious disorders for the worker. Yeah, like I said on the first slide, oftentimes it's an interaction of multiple factors. It's not just one. Maybe it's static posture combined with high repetitions. Maybe it's awkward posture combined with vibration. Or maybe it's awkward posture combined with overexertion or a great deal of force that's included or involved in the work task. And it may, I'm only talking about examples where there are two factors interacting. There may be work tasks where more than two of these risk factors interact to result in the work-related musculoskeletal disorder. Also, I should mention that it can be more than musculoskeletal disorders that we're talking about. When we're talking about compression affecting the blood vessels and blood circulation through the body, that can go beyond just simple work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Whole body vibration, as we'll see, can affect the digestive tract. It can affect the nervous system. So it's not just the soft tissues and the skeleton that can be affected by these risk factors. Of these primary risk factors, and I should put the word primary in here, primary ergonomic risk factors. Of these primary ergonomic risk factors, it's really hard to identify one that is of the greatest concern. But if somebody held a gun to my head and said, hey, pick one of these as being the most serious or of the greatest concern, I would probably have to go with forces. So many back injuries, so many cases of tendinitis, so many cases of other musculoskeletal disorders are related to overloading of the skeletal system. Just too much weight, too much pulling force, too much pushing force. After forces would probably be my number one concern. Number 2, I would have to say, boy, it's hard. They're all of concern for safety professionals and should be of concern for workers. But I might have to put repetition at number 2. But posture is also important. It's all of these factors can contribute to different disorders developing. A little bit more about posture. Again, we talked about awkward posture. What we're talking about here is the body is positioned in a manner placing stresses on connective tissues and the skeleton. What we want to see in our workers throughout the work task is what we call a static posture. A static posture is indicated by, or could be indicated by, a vertical line drawn through that passes through the worker's ear, their shoulder, their hips, and their ankle. Worker standing in this position is exhibiting a neutral posture, and that's what we should teach our workers, to try to maintain that neutral posture. Shoulders back, head up, and so on. Static posture is staying in the same position for extended periods of time. If you combine static posture along with a muscle loading, a load, an exertion on the muscles, that complicates the static posture even further. An example of static posture with muscle loading would be the worker that's required throughout the workday to maintain a fixed posture while having a load imposed on their skeletal system, maybe holding a heavy load in front of their body for extended periods of time. One way to combat problems with posture is to teach workers to move. Researchers have concluded that periodic movement can be beneficial. It is beneficial. It's necessary for avoiding postural related disorders. And first of all, we want to shoot for a neutral posture. In addition to the neutral posture is movement. And I guess the movement really is more to combat the problem with static posture, periodic movement. But you do have some professions, some tasks that it's difficult for the workers to move. Again, the truck driver, the equipment operator. It's hard for a truck driver to make any money if they're stopping every 20 minutes to move and stretch. It's hard for a truck driver or an equipment operator to maintain their productivity, keep doing their job, and still have movement outside of the range of motion required to perform their job. Again, the equipment operator, most equipment is joystick controlled, so you have the operator locked into that position with each hand on a joystick. If their hands aren't on that joystick in that position, they're not making any money. They're not producing for their company. So the real challenge with that situation is introducing some type of movement that will lessen the effects of that static position. And I don't honestly have the answer for that. I don't know that ergonomics, the science, has the answer for the worker that is locked into that position during their task. Again, you can't stop every 15 or 20 minutes. Now, if it's an office job, you can break up that static posture every 15 to 20 minutes, and that's what's recommended, as we'll see when we talk about preventative measures. Every 15 to 20 minutes, it's recommended that workers, take a stretch break. They move around a little bit. If it's someone working at a keyboard, take a break, move around, stand up, walk around, stretch, and so on. If that would be possible, that can combat disorders related to static posture. I guess awkward posture is really more about maintaining the neutral posture. I mentioned office workers, and it may come as a surprise to you, but office workers are a high-risk group for musculoskeletal disorders, and I mentioned this in the first video. Office workers are number 2 on the list for lower back disorders, and it has to do with sitting in a posture that contributes to the development of these lower back disorders. Also, it can be awkward posture combined with static posture. One of the methods to combat posture problems in office workers is to provide more stand-up workstations, which we'll talk more about. The standing position, as long as that neutral posture is maintained, it breaks up that static posture. The static posture, I mean, of sitting all day at a computer workstation or at a desk. And there are a lot of back disorders. Again, I mentioned lower back disorders here. That's what the statistics indicate, number 2 on the list of lower back disorders. But it's also upper back and neck disorders are common among workers who have office jobs. Again, the fix for this, or a corrective measure, is to have stretch and flex breaks built into the workday. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about preventative measures. Again, overexertion injuries, according to Liberty Mutual's annual Workplace Safety Index, overexertion is the most expensive injury in the U.S. About $14 billion per year is lost because of overexertion. And when we're talking about overexertion, we're talking about lifting, pushing, pulling, lowering, or carrying tasks that require loading in excess of the worker's physical capacity. We're just putting too much load on the worker's musculoskeletal system. That musculoskeletal system, once it's overloaded, it's going to break down. And that breakdown is going to manifest itself as tendinitis, different vertebral column disorders. All kinds of disorders can be related to these overexertion injuries. Again, I've mentioned that ergonomic related, or I should say musculoskeletal disorders, the number 1 type of workplace related injury. Among all of these musculoskeletal disorders, overexertion would be number 1. Some specific examples of overexertion injuries would be hernia, spinal column disorders, a disc injury perhaps, muscle strains, muscle tears, tendinitis, a tendon inflammation, a torn tendon, where the muscle actually pulls away from the bone. And that's a pretty serious injury there, likely to require surgery to repair if you have a truly torn tendon. Now, an inflamed tendon, there may be some tearing involved with tendon inflammation, but it's not pulled away from the bone. And one thing to consider, and one thing to teach your workers, it's not necessarily going to be powerlifting level loads that we're talking about. It could be moderate loads requiring moderate forces that are combined with high repetitions, combine that with poor posture, poor lifting technique. These 3, force, repetition, and posture combined, can result in the WMSDs occurring in the workplace. Doesn't have to be 300 pounds. Doesn't have to be a guy that's trying to put pick up a water pump and put it in the back of the pickup by himself. That does happen. That's one of the injuries that I've worked in my career was just that. A worker tried to pick up a portable water pump, which probably weighed 250 to 300 pounds. He tried to pick it up, put it in the back of the pickup himself, and ended up with a hernia. Another thing to consider, extreme forces can be applied to the body in other ways. It's not just lifting, pushing, pulling. lowering or carrying loads. Another example of this resulted in a severe spinal column disc injury. Had a worker jump off of the tracks of an excavator, of a track hoe. The tracks on this excavator, the top of the tracks was about 2.5 to 3 feet above the ground. So he steps out of the cab, steps on the tracks, jumps off to the ground. He weighed about 275 pounds. That generated enough force to blow up his spinal column. That worker sustained an injury that they will never fully recover from. And that's a type of force also, that type of force from jumping and landing on a lower surface. And the same types of forces that would be involved in a fall were involved in that particular incident. A very serious injury. So as a safety manager, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about prevention, but one of the top things on our list would be prevention of overexertion related injuries. Now I do have a video that I'm not going to show you that deals with hernia and hernia repair. If you would like the link to this video, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to share it with you. It is a YouTube video. You could go to YouTube and do a search for hernia repair, and you would find videos on the subject. I don't do it every time. I didn't do it every time when I was working as a safety professional, but occasionally when I was doing different training sessions, I would show workers a video of a hernia repair. If I was trying to get across the point that, hey, you got to take care of your body. You can't allow yourself to be exposed to this kind of force. Don't overexert yourself. Don't do more than your body's capable of doing. That hernia repair video kind of gets their attention. Because what a hernia is, there are different types of hernias, but very generally speaking, a hernia is a torn muscle in the abdominal region that allows your insides to poke through. And there are different types, and they're not all exactly that, but that's basically what we're talking about with a hernia. Torn abdominal musculature. The core is torn, and when the core holds everything in our insides. When that core is torn, our insides can come out, and there can be bulging in areas where we don't want bulging. So again, that's the videos can be an eye-opener if you're doing training, but that would fall into the category of what I would call a graphic video, and you want to use those sparingly with workers. Another primary ergonomic risk factor is excessive repetition. Most work's going to involve some level of repetition, and repetition is not necessarily all by itself a bad thing if that repetition is broken up. And generally we're talking about high reps even with low force, like the assembly worker, the data entry worker, the carpenter with a framing hammer doing the same thing all day. And that's a part of many jobs, is that kind of repetition. We can't eliminate necessarily those types of tasks, but what we can do is train workers how to mitigate the effects of that repetition. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about prevention measures. Another type of repetition is, and again, you don't see this necessarily in a lot of textbooks, but I consider it a type of repetition. It's what I call continual loading, or what I call long reps. An example of a long rep would be picking up a load, maybe a 75-pound bale of hay, and carrying it 30 yards, or having a 5-gallon bucket of water or feed in each hand and carrying that across the feed lot. 5-gallon bucket in each hand, you're looking at 35-40 pounds probably, depending on the density of the material. In each hand, carry that long distances repeatedly throughout a workday. That can result in a variety of disorders. And repetition is one of those risk factors that is exacerbated by loading, and also exacerbated by poor posture. I would, if I were to identify the three most serious, or the most serious combination of risk factors, it would be the loading, the posture, and the repetition. Those three things together lead to a lot of work-related musculoskeletal disorders. And as safety managers, one of our tasks is to mitigate those types of combinations in the workplace. As we mitigate those combinations, hopefully we can prevent the work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Another ergonomic risk factor would be compression, or also referred to as contact stress. This is where a body part is pressed against another object for extended periods. For example, a driver in a vehicle that doesn't fit them very well. The knees, the shin, whatever body part hits the dash. Again, for short periods, this is no problem, but for longer periods, it could be a problem. Another example would be the office worker with forearms compressed against the unpadded edge of a desk, or as I mentioned before, the assembly worker that has their arms compressed against the edge of the workbench, the assembly bench. Physiologically or anatomically, what's going on with compression is different forms of nerve impingement, and also is affecting blood circulation. It's interfering with circulation of blood through the body. Single point vibration. Vibration in general is considered an ergonomic risk factor, but we do need to break it down into single point vibration and whole body vibration. With single point vibration, an example would be hand-arm vibration that has localized effects on the structures of the hand, arm, shoulder, and back. A common source of vibration that will affect these parts of the body would be different power tools. Of course, the jackhammer. But it doesn't have to be a 70-pound jackhammer and the vibration from that jackhammer to have effects. It could be using a smaller hammer drill or a smaller drill for an extended period of time. It could be a demo hammer like we have here. Any tool that vibrates, that vibration affects the hand, the shoulder. It affects the whole body, but it's mostly impacting the hand, the wrist, the elbow, the shoulder region. Working in the construction industry for so long, I encountered a lot of work-related injuries resulting from vibrating tools like this. And there can be a variety of specific disorders related to the prolonged use of these handheld power tools. Now, there are different aids that can mitigate this particular exposure. Probably, well, I want to save corrective measures until we get to the video on prevention. But just for now, single point vibration refers to the type of vibration illustrated in the pictures and in the text on this slide. Whole body vibration is exactly what it says it is. It's a vibration that vibrates not just the hands and the arms and the shoulders, but the whole body to a large degree. One exposure to whole body vibration historically has been for equipment operators operating ride-on equipment like bulldozers and loaders and so on. Bulldozers, loaders, excavators, roller compactors like we have here. Manufacturers have recognized the danger, the discomfort caused to operators because of vibration, and modern equipment is equipped with very effective vibration dampeners to separate or isolate the operators from the source of vibration. In the upper left-hand corner here, we have a modern piece of equipment where the operator is going to be more protected from the whole body vibration. In this picture here, we have an antique bulldozer, and that operator is not protected from the vibration by these vibration dampeners that you find in modern equipment. This operator, at the end of a 10-hour day, and I say 10 hours because guys who run these machines, they're not doing 8-hour days. They're doing 10-hour days at minimum most of the time, unless they're union, and a lot of the operators are not union. So 10-hour day is very common. At the end of that 10-hour day, they can barely stand because of their body being vibrated and jostled around all day. And the whole body vibration is really a very interesting phenomenon, what's going on here. And I wish we had more time to dig into it more deeply. But it's that low frequency continual vibration that leads to the problems. And the problems are more than just musculoskeletal in nature. It can result in headaches, intestinal or digestive system problems, nervous system problems can result from this long-term exposure to low-frequency vibrations. Now, the vibrations that we talked about in the previous slide, the single-point vibration from these types of tools, this would be a higher frequency vibration, meaning more cycles per second. But the whole body vibration oftentimes has a lower cycles per second frequency that maybe the worker doesn't even notice it. They don't feel themselves being vibrated necessarily, but they are being vibrated. All of their insides are being vibrated. Their organ systems are being vibrated. I can't really think of a good analogy here, but just try to imagine having your body exposed to this low frequency vibration for an extended period of time. That vibration's causing movement in all of your organ systems. How do you think that's going to feel at the end of a work shift, at the end of a 10-hour shift on a antique bulldozer? And it's not just the antique dozers, it's not just the old equipment that can be problematic. There can be modern workplaces and modern machinery that can result in these low frequency vibrations that can result in these types of physiological effects. And besides equipment operators, truck drivers also are exposed to this whole body vibration. I come from a truck driving family. I refused when I turned 18. It was almost expected in my family when you turn 18 you get your CDL. I refused to get my CDL because I did not want to be a truck driver. But I've ridden in a lot of trucks, and the vibration would put me right to sleep. And I thought, well, I can never be a truck driver because the vibration has that effect on me. But that vibration putting me to sleep is an example of vibration's effect on our nervous system. But it affects other organ systems as well. Another thing to consider, and this is hard to determine in advance, some people may be more susceptible to the effects of whole body vibration, WBV, and because they are more susceptible to the effects, may not be able to work in those environments where they're exposed to whole body vibration. A lot of time, I don't think there's a medical test that's going to determine if someone is more susceptible. That's going to be a trial and error deal. And maybe that's what was going on with me in my experience falling asleep anytime I got in a truck. I may be one of those individuals that's more susceptible to the whole body vibration and not able to work in that environment. But anyhow, it worked out. I ended up not being a truck driver, not being exposed to those types of vibrations. But something we do need to consider, the impacts of whole body vibrations. Again, the upside of this is that modern equipment does an excellent job of insulating workers from the vibration, but it still needs to be on our radar as a consideration. Now, this next one is not really a physical ergonomics focus, but I want to mention it because there are a lot of workplace injuries that occur as a result of what I call over-articulation. Again, not usually the focus of ergonomics. Over-articulation occurs when a joint is forced through an abnormal range of motion. And there's usually force involved. It often results from high energy impacts, or it could be high energy impacts combined with a certain body position at the time of the impact. And here's what we mean by high energy impacts if you can't visualize that. A fall, struck by a swinging object, struck by a moving vehicle, impact with another worker. Put my ER on there. These would be examples of high energy impacts. And again, it's not normally the focus of ergonomics or physical ergonomics, but it does result in a lot of serious work-related musculoskeletal injuries. I won't say disorders, I'll say injuries. We're talking about catastrophic damage to the joint capsule and to the components that make up that joint capsule, the ligaments, the tendons, the cartilage. The muscle, the bone also can be affected. Now, all of these different elements are part of our joint capsules, whether it's a hinge joint, whether it's a ball and socket joint, they're all made up of these different components. One area, one environment where you see a lot of these over-articulation type of injuries that are very serious is in the world of athletics. Many serious athletic injuries result from high energy impacts causing an over-articulation of a joint. These types of injuries also occur in the workplace. Many workers are, if you think about it, they're athletes in a way. They're using their bodies like athletes use their bodies. They're exerting themselves like athletes exert themselves. Construction workers, for example, I always told my guys, hey, you guys are athletes. The only difference between you and athletes who get paid to play a sport is that you work a lot harder. You're working 10 hours a day. They may be working 4 or 5 hours a day. So you guys work harder, but you're athletes, and you got to take care of your body like athletes takes care of their bodies. And you're exposed to some of the same types of hazards that a football player or a hockey player or a basketball player would be exposed to. One excellent example of what I'm getting at here with these over-articulation injuries would be Tua Tagovailoa and his hip injury from several years ago. Not talking about his recent concussion problem, but the hip injury that he had when he was at Alabama. A horrible injury. And it was a product of a high energy impact and the body position at the time of the impact. It basically knocked his hip out of socket. When the injury occurred, I didn't know if he would be able to come back from that injury. I'm happy to see that he has been able to come back from that injury, but it was a very serious over-articulation type of injury. Many of the knee injuries that occur in sports and in the workplace are over-articulations. Shoulders, elbows also are over-articulation type of injuries. And to control these types of injuries, it really involves controlling the impacts. Going back to Hatton's thoughts on controlling dangerous energy. We control the dangerous energy. We reduce the likelihood of high energy impacts in the workplace. That's how we can work on preventing over-articulation. Again, not traditionally the focus of physical ergonomics. Now, this is not, if you look at ergonomics textbooks, you're not going to see repetitive exertion listed as a primary risk factor. I'm combining repetition and exertion because, and like I said before, repetition, exertion, posture, these three combined for a lot of work-related musculoskeletal disorders. But repetitive exertion, if we just take out the postural aspect of it, even if they have perfect posture, repetitive lifting and moving of light to moderate loads can result in cumulative trauma disorder, which results from repeated micro injuries that aren't allowed to heal, or micro trauma, damage that's not allowed to heal up. That's what can happen with repetitive exertion. And the classic example for all of you guys who were raised on a farm, hauling hay, throwing bales of hay. You do this 10 hours a day all summer long, you're going to be pretty sore, and there's a chance that you're going to develop cumulative trauma disorder as a result, especially if you're older. 15-year-olds, 15-year-olds are a lot more resilient, can take a lot more abuse. But as we get older, as we'll see here in a second, age combines with these risk factors and makes some people more susceptible to the development of musculoskeletal disorders. But repetitive exertion can result in muscle injury and soreness. Other body parts can be subject to injury. Tendon and ligament damage can occur. And there can also be relatively minor inflammation, say a tendonitis that develops as a result of this. A golfer's elbow or an inflamed rotator cuff in the shoulder can develop as a result of repetitive exertion. There are some work tasks, some industries where repetitive exertion is part of the job. I've never been in an Amazon fulfillment center, but I envision a workplace where you have workers throughout the day. They're moving materials around manually. They're putting materials up on conveyors. They're continually exerting themselves. That's what we've got with repetitive exertion. And I could see where, and Amazon does have a pretty bad safety record. It's getting better. They have started to pay more attention to it. But that's the perfect environment for this type of repetitive exertion to occur, for work-related musculoskeletal disorders to occur. And we will talk about how do we mitigate this? How do we control this? These factors. We'll talk about that in our fourth video in the series. Again, tendonitis bursitis would be an example of the tendon and ligament damage resulting from these types of activities. But it's more than that. It can be more than that. Okay, that covers the primary risk factors. Now I want to talk about personal risk factors, which work with or interact with the primary risk factors. And as they interact with the primary risk factors, can result in a greater likelihood for the development of work-related musculoskeletal disorders. And conditions or characteristics making some workers more susceptible to the primary ergonomic risk factors is another way of thinking about it. Age. As we get older, we're more susceptible. Our physical condition. If we're out of shape, overweight, and we haven't walked across the yard in 3 months, if we don't move, if we're not physically fit, we're going to be more susceptible to the repetition, to the overexertion, to the forces, to all of the other risk factors that we talked about previously. Previous injury. If we've had a previous elbow injury, that makes us more susceptible. Maybe it's a genetic abnormality. Maybe it's an abnormality that we were born with or that we developed as we aged, but it's something that we inherited from our ancestors. An example of this would be scoliosis, an abnormal curvature of the spine. Someone with an abnormal curvature of their spine, they're going to be more susceptible to the primary ergonomic risk factors and more likely to develop musculoskeletal disorders. Another example of something that people are born with would be a leg length discrepancy. One leg is longer than the other leg, which, by the way, is commonly associated with scoliosis. Someone who suffers from scoliosis, they will commonly have one leg that's a little longer than the other, but it can be separate from scoliosis. But these are examples of physical abnormalities that we have no control over that might make us more susceptible to the loading, to the repetition, and the primary risk factors. A worker's lifestyle. A worker, and this kind of goes along with physical condition. If they don't eat a good diet, if they're living off of candy bars and energy drinks, they're going to be more susceptible. If they drink excessively, and I'm talking about alcohol, if they drink excessively, that's going to make them more susceptible. Tobacco use. A number of studies have shown that tobacco users are more susceptible to work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Again, tobacco use results in nicotine flowing through our bloodstreams. Nicotine is a poison that weakens different parts of our bodies, and that nicotine weakening effect can result in work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Tobacco use does not have an effect just on our respiratory system, but nicotine in our system, whether maybe it's chewing nicotine gum, maybe it's using smokeless tobacco, nicotine in our bloodstream, the poison, nicotine being a poison, can affect our physical well-being. Not getting enough sleep also can be a lifestyle characteristic that makes someone more susceptible. You're not getting enough sleep. Sleep is when we recover. That's our recovery time. If we're not getting enough sleep after a long work day, perhaps we're not fully recovered for the next work day. Not being fully recovered makes us more susceptible. There are certain medications, and I'm not going to go through this. This could be a whole lecture itself. The different commonly prescribed medications and their effects on the development of musculoskeletal disorders, but different medications can make workers more susceptible. Hobbies. Workers who play rugby on the weekends, they're rock climbers, they ride bulls or saddle broncs on the weekend, they're rodeo performers, rodeo athletes. These types of hobbies may also, again, I think the way this works, or how I should characterize this, if you're playing rugby if you go to a rugby tournament that's on a Saturday and a Sunday, and you play 6 matches over that 2-day period, you go to work on Monday, you're going to be worn out, you're going to be sore, you're going to be more susceptible to the demands that the workplace is imposing on your body. Same thing with a rider, a saddle bronc rider. They're going to be beat up from playing rodeo all weekend. That's going to make them more susceptible. Rock climbing, same thing. And there's a lot of other hobbies I could put into this list. I'm not meaning to pick on any one particular hobby. But if hobbies have a high physical demand on our bodies, that's going to make us more susceptible to the primary ergonomic risk factors. The last slide. In addition to predisposing factors, we have contributing factors. Again, they do not cause the MSD, but interact with the primary risk factors and can hasten the development of MSDs. An example would be temperature in the workplace. Cold temperature can interact with vibrating tools, resulting in Raynaud syndrome, which we talked about when we talked about thermal stress in the workplace. Lighting. Poor lighting can cause an assembly worker to stoop or slouch over so they can see better. Having inadequate recovery time can be a contributing factor. The microtraumas are not given time to heal, and that leads to the cumulative trauma. So we have a primary risk factor, we have predisposing factors, then we have contributing factors that all combine, work together, and can result in work-related musculoskeletal disorders. And that brings us to the end of this video. Let me know if you have any questions. In the next video, we're going to talk about some specific common work-related musculoskeletal disorders.